Hi, in this I guess episode of Organisational Health, I really want to touch on something that actually does relate directly to health: resilience and adaptability in an organisation. And by resilience and adaptability, I'm really referring to the team, I'm referring to the board of executives, I'm referring to the managing director, the owner. You know, when I look back on my military service, resilience was kind of like one of those things that was a matter of course. But what I hadn't realised was how well I had been trained in being resilient to high pressure situations, in having the ability to adapt to those situations. And in my role as a high performance coach, what I find is that actually today, and certainly after the last few years that we've experienced, you know, there are blurred lines in terms of what resilience actually is, and then suddenly we start to get into the narrative of mental health, and then ultimately into mental illness, all of which are quite bona fide. The difference is, I think, how we, through being a focused organisation, can start to create the environment to encourage higher levels of resilience. Now, there are a lot of contributing factors, and you'll see, you know, in terms of when you have a read of the article, you know, inadequate, support systems within an organisation, a poor culture, which can lead towards creating stress and creating, you know, the challenges in terms of mental illness through unnecessary pressure, high levels of stress in an organisation. One of the outcomes of being highly resilient and adaptable is the ability to have a high level of autonomy. But actually, when you are highly controlled, there is less autonomy in an organisation, and indeed that can have an adverse impact. And it feels as though we've blurred these lines as to being resilient. And actually, when we feel the need to be resilient, we now identify some of those challenges as a mental health issue. Whereas actually the baseline of being resilient is actually it's a mindset, it's taking ownership, it's having a high level of accountability. It's being able to recognize that, you know, when the pressure is on, actually, you know, I've got to take control, I've got to step up to the plate and be more resilient, to be more adaptable to a situation. So all of those things are areas that organizations can start to structure. Now, it's interesting because resilience and the ability to think outside of the box, to be adaptable, are elements that can be trained, they can be taught, they can be learned. Again, that was my reflection from my military days. So we've got to start to recognize that in organizations, but in doing so, we do need to recognize the situation that we live in. You know, the world has changed dramatically. You know, there is increased stress, which is leading to greater pressure. There is significant change in societal attitudes. There is almost an inherent, lacking in coping mechanisms, because there is so much support out there. It's kind of like, one of the things that you often heard talk about during COVID was actually our immune systems might well be limited, because we're now not exposing ourselves to any of the little bugs and the coughs that we used to have when we were all locked down. Now, I don't know the statistics, and I'm not a scientist on this, but I think most people will recognize the logic that if we are our bodies are building a natural immune system to some of these bugs. The same is for resilience, the same is for adaptability. If we are being exposed to, pressure, if we are being exposed to certain situations where we've got to be resilient, where we've got to be more adaptable, then of course that's going to have a positive impact in the long term. And it starts really with, I guess, for each of us as individuals, taking personal ownership, recognizing that level of resilience that we should have as individuals. You know, we need to be more resilient in a world that is becoming more complex, in a world that is becoming more volatile, where there is more change, where there is more challenge. You know, if we become less resilient to that, then actually that's only going to see our demise, and certainly that of organizations will find it harder and more challenging to survive and to thrive. So resilience and adaptability become a key element. So what can we do to nurture resilience and adaptability within any organization? Well, we can promote I guess what we want to call it is a psychological safety, but what I prefer to use it in layman's terms is you turn up and you can be vulnerable. You know that you can say something, but it's a safe environment for you to say what you feel needs to be said. Now, nothing deflammatory, nothing rude, nothing that would be construed in those ways, but rather to challenge an idea and not be worried whether or not you're completely out there on left field, but rather to know that actually I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable here and tell you what I think. We can encourage open and healthy conflict or candid communication. Now, just ask yourself if in your organisation, how many, I call them water cooler conversations, are going on? How many conversations are you not having when they should be had, whether that's at a meeting, at a team meeting, at a board meeting, but rather that you're going away afterwards and having those conversations. So when we encourage that candidness in conversations, we create more resilience to being challenged. We create more adaptability to suddenly changing our thinking, because we're more open in our communication. Provide the appropriate support structures. Have management that recognise and understand that resilience is one aspect, but there is a lead and a lending to where we start to suffer and maybe identify with mental health. And maybe we can understand what mental illness starts to look like, and the subtle differences and nuances in that, and then how we can support. One of the main processes that I help with businesses and organisations in that respect is to create a structure and a foundation of a manager as a coach. So a manager then is given greater skill sets to be able to engage with its team. And that leads really into the training and development side of life. We do need to be more aware of how we can train our team and engage our team in such a way that they can build that resilience and that adaptability. And that in its own right is going to have a massive impact on any organisation. So resilience and adaptability, the relationship between the two, I think you can see from this, it's more than just buzzwords. It's more than just highfalutin. There is absolutely a focus in terms of how we can have this turn up in our businesses and organizations and have a positive impact, not just for the organization, but also for the individual. So really now more than ever, it's time to harness the power of resilience and adaptability.